Hey folks, this is Cindy. Thanks so much for stopping by. In today's video, we're going to be talking about no line coloring solid stamps, and I'm going to be using the Penny Black bundled up stamp. This is a rubber mount cling stamp, and I think that it is just the cutest thing that I've ever seen in my life, and I really enjoyed coloring him in. I did stamp him on Express Blending card, and I am using the Ink on 3 Fade Out ink because, again, I do want to do some no line coloring. You could use whatever color, light colored ink you'd like. However, the Ink on 3 no line is perfect because it does not alter my Copic coloring at all, and that is just perfect. I also made sure that I took out that foam pad of my Misty because this is a rubber mount stamp and I needed to have the room in my lid. And then I stamped this probably about 3 or 4 times so you guys could really see it here on the video. At this point, I'm just going to be following the shapes of the solid stamp, folks. I don't have any outlines to follow necessarily, but I do have a pretty good shape to follow. I start with that BV23, add it where I want my darkest shaded areas to be. I come in with that R29, then the R27, and blend that out with the R24. There isn't a whole lot of highlight there, folks. I don't need this to read with pretty stark highlights or a lot of light space. It can be a very dark, deep red scarf, and because it is fabric, it's not going to have super shiny areas, so I'm not leaving a whole lot of room for that R24, but I am making sure that I blend everything out with the R24 because that's going to really help me get that good solid blend in this, especially these larger areas here. And there is a lot to color in some of these. You need to make sure that you have plenty of inks in your markers to get through some of this coloring, folks, because if you don't, it's going to start the streak and you're not going to get a very good blend. So make sure that your markers are nice and inky and this will work out great for you. I'm making sure that I'm adding the majority of this shade with this BV23 right here where the separate portions of the scarf meet together. So right there at that knot where the scarf goes around his neck, where these tails come down and then come out to the left, that's going to have some of that BV23. I'm also adding some of this BV23 to this fringe area. Now, if I were to do this again, I would actually skip this. I wouldn't add all of this shade down in here. What ends up happening is these actually end up looking a little bit more round and less realistic than what I had hoped for. But I was just kind of playing around with it, kind of trying out something a little bit different from what I had done before to see how I liked it. At this stage, I'm not a huge fan of it. It wasn't bad. It's not awful. I didn't ruin anything, just not a big fan of it, and I wouldn't do it again. After my BV23, I'm coming in with that R29 again. And at this point, look how much of this image I still have to color in. Yes, I still have two more Copic colors to bring in. However, I could definitely be adding more of this R29 than what I did. I decided to go a little bit more on the conservative side. For whatever reason, I don't even know, but I did decide to be a little bit more conservative with my R29, and I didn't need to because even after bringing in this R27, I still could have gone a little bit darker with the R29. Oh, the only thing that would have ended up happening with that R29 and adding more to it, especially here along this right-hand side, is it would have made it look like it was tilting away from the eye just a little bit more, and that would have been totally fine. Plus, I wouldn't have had to work as hard as I did on my blend. It wasn't awful. My markers have a lot of ink in them. However, I do have to work this R24 just a little bit, and you're going to see that here in just a moment. I was also thinking while I was coloring this in that I could have actually finished this scarf off by adding some of the texture, like a crosshatch texture all over the scarf, like a real scarf in real life. It's fine that I didn't, and I totally forgot while I was coloring this in to do it, but it would look really groovy if you did. It would definitely add another level of realism. Now look at that break between that R24 and that R27 there on the edge of that scarf. I'm going to fix that here a little bit later with my colored pencils, but I definitely could have avoided that by bringing out those darker colors just a little bit more. I'm also going to use the same colors here on these berries as I did on the scarf for continuity. There's no reason to get out another set of colors when this one works just fine and it will match our scarf just fine. I'm also going to repeat that same color continuity here shortly with the nose and the ribbon on the hat, but we'll talk about that more here when we get there. I am making sure that I'm leaving a little bit more highlight on these than what I did on the scarf, because these probably would have a little bit more highlight. Plus, because they stick up further in the air, they're going to catch the eye just a little bit more, so they can have some more highlight. And I'll reinforce that more when I get there with my colored pencils. So now we need to start coloring in this guy's face. Now remember, when you're coloring in white, folks, you're just coloring in shade. Now at this point, it's going to look kind of scary. It's going to look like I'm out of my mind and I'm going crazy dark on this guy and I don't know what I'm doing, but stick it out. You'll see exactly what I'm doing. I'm starting with the BV23 and I'm going in where I need that darkest shade to be. So right down there by that scarf, underneath the brim of the hat, on the right hand side of the face, underneath his little carrot nose, needs some shade there. I did bring in a dark gray Staedtler pen to fill in those eyes before I went any further, so I didn't lose, at least inadvertently, lose his little eye peepers. So I needed to make sure that those were done. Now I'm coming in with the BV23. I'm going right over the top of that BV20 and I'm making sure that I get a really good blend on this. Now I'm not scrubbing, I'm just making sure that I have a good blend before that between that BV23 and this BV20 before I move on. Then I come in with that B60 and I start over the top of that BV23, go over the top of that BV20 and blend that out, but I'm making sure that I leave lots of white there. I do kind of push back some of those edges with a 0 and then I call it good. Now at this point it's going to look crazy dark, but again, stick with me, you'll see how it turns out. Now I'm going to color in the band of his hat because I do need to give myself a little bit of definition in shape. Coloring in solid images like this are really easy as long as you kind of pick your areas where you can define your shape. So the areas that you don't make so much sense will kind of make more sense in there in the end. I started with the YR18, blended that out with the YR16. Now I have the YR14 and I'm going to finish that off with the YR12. I could have left off that YR12. However, I really liked how light it was in the transition, but going up from the 18 all the way down to that 12. So I definitely wanted to add that in there, even though it made for a 4th marker. I also didn't choose the color for this band based on the color of the band. I chose the orange combination because I knew I needed an orange carrot nose. So whatever my nose color was going to be is whatever my band color was going to be. So both of them would work well together. So again, there's that continuity. I'm starting with that YR18, going around the base of his nose, kind of along the bottom portion of it. And you can see I kind of brought up some of that YR18 up there. It does not look perfectly smooth or even. That is fine. I want it to have a little bit of texture, kind of look a wee bit jagged. Again, I go in with that YR16, blend that out with the YR14, and finish it off with the YR12. This isn't going to have a lot of highlight or lightness to it either. It's a carrot, folks. It's not shiny. Probably shouldn't be shiny. Be kind of weird if it were shiny. So I don't need a whole lot of that light there. Now, I am going to have to map out some of this brim a little bit to kind of make it work out for me, but this is what I'm talking about. I'm going to take a portion of this brim that makes sense and knock that out of there so I can finish off the rest. Now, you can see that line that's going underneath that hat, and I'm pretty confident that that is the shape right there. And so I'm coming in with that C7. I mapped it out with my C3. Now I'm going to come in with that C7. I know that that needs to be dark there. Then I'm going to go over the top with that with my C5, and I do end up bringing in the C3. If I were to do this again, I would just do C7 and C5 and call it a day. There isn't going to be a whole lot of light down there. It doesn't need a whole lot of light down there. So now I already have that shape in there. I feel good about working on the rest of it. Now this side, I want it to look like it is coming going down, bending down towards that scarf, kind of like it's flopping down. So I'm going to add quite a bit of darkness here, but it also needs to look rounded on that back side. So I'm going to add that C7 there. I'm going to bring that out a little bit, but not out all the way. Now I can see some of the shape over here on the other side. And on that right-hand side, I do stay a little bit conservative there because once I have that colored in, I can come back and go darker. I just can't go lighter. So I need to make sure that I'm giving myself enough room to do that here in a minute. Now, I know I want this to look like it is rolled up, and I'm also using the picture reference on the package so I can kind of eyeball it and see what direction I need to go. But I know I want this portion of the hat to look like it's rolled up. So I started with that C5, went along the right-hand edge there, came out a little bit, and then finished that off with the C3. And now I can see even more of the shape. So I'm going to add a little bit more of that C7 up underneath the brim of that hat. So the rolled part of it isn't quite so wide. I'm going to kind of narrow that down a little bit, bring that darker portion underneath that hat up just a little bit higher so it reads a little bit darker. Then I brought that C7 into that portion of the top portion of the brim there and made that a little bit darker and gave it a little bit more shape. And then that is good to go. That's exactly what I wanted. Now I'm going to do the top portion on this hat. I do go in with the C7 down the full left hand side and up a portion of the left top the top left portion of the hat, but I don't quite do that on the right hand side. And honestly, at the end of the day, I probably should have, because the shape doesn't feel quite right to me. It doesn't, instead of looking rounded up there, I kind of feel like I'm looking at the toe of a stocking, like a Christmas stocking. So it doesn't feel quite right to me, but I decided not to fix it. I'll just go with it and call it good. That was a C7. Now, again, I'm going to come in with that C5, and then I'll finish this off with a C3. You could absolutely go darker than this, folks. I thought about it. My plan was to go with C7, C5, C3. If it didn't feel dark enough, I could go in with a C10, a C7, and a C5. At the end of the day, I decided once it was done, and I was totally fine with it. But you could definitely go darker, and it would read that much more black. And you can afford to do that too, because you have a heavy, deep red scarf down here on the bottom portion of this guy. So you could definitely afford to go a little bit darker on the hat, but it's totally fine if you don't. Now see, this is this lighter portion on the top portion of his hat that I'm talking about. It just reads way too light up there and a little bit more pointy than what's necessary, but it's fine. We're going to call it good. All right, I don't show you the background because I actually did not record it, but it was a really easy background, and I will have these colors linked down below as well as over on my blog if you're interested in seeing the colors that I use for that. In the meantime, I'm going to get started on my colored pencil portion here, and I'm starting with the dark purple. I'm going where I would have had that BV23, and I have a super sharp pencil and a very light hand because this does not need to read purple. It just needs to read darker. Now, there's some areas there where that knot is. And on the other side of his scarf, on the right-hand side of that scarf where it rounds around his body, I wanted that to read just a little bit darker, push that back just a little bit more. So instead of building up that dark purple, I actually bring in a black grape and push it further back with that. Now with this dark purple, when I go back to that, I am kind of extending those lines out just a little bit more. And that's where those thinner, finer points on a pencil come in really handy, because I want to add a more texture, a little bit more folds and movement in the scarf so it doesn't look so flat. And I can definitely do that with a sharp, darker pencil. To blend out that dark purple and the black grape, I am coming in with a crimson red. This is almost an identical match to an R29 and an R27. I don't need to go in with a heavy hand. I'm not trying to add a crimson red to bring in another shade on this. I'm just blending that transition between that darker purple, those darker areas into the reds, and then I can call it good. I do use a Pablo white to bring out a tiny, tiny bit of those highlights there on the very edge of that scarf, but I have a super light hand and I'm slowly building that up, and I don't want it to read as super stark and super bright. Just a wee bit lighter is all I'm going for. A Pablo white is perfect for that because it is probably the most transparent white out of all the colored pencils I've ever used, so it works out great for that. I'm going to do the same thing on this scarf that I did on the front portion of it. Now, at this point, if I were to have added that texture to it or that cross hatching to make it look like it was textured, instead of adding my shading in the rounded areas or the darker areas, I would have actually come in with a really sharp dark purple pencil and added those lines in first, and then gone in and did all of my shading over the top of that. That would have looked a lot more natural. It would have made everything look like it was there on purpose and it had a real texture to it. But again, I forgot. It's not a big deal. If you decide to do that, make sure that you add in that detail first before you add in any of your shadows and shading, folks. It's super important. Okay, so I'm going to finish up the scarf here again. I'm just doing the same thing that I had done there on the front portion of that scarf. And then I'm going to start coloring in his face a little bit. Next week, I will be sharing a video with you where I talk more about Copic coloring in white, but take a look at his face right now. When I first colored this in, y'all probably thought I was crazy, but now that I have some reference of color around that face, now that everything else is colored in around it, it actually doesn't look that dark. It looks like a rounded, shaded snowman face instead of like a blue-violet crazy guy. So I'm going to talk about that more next week. I'm going to share a card with you. It's actually a flower card, a floral card. So it has, it's a little bit more complicated, and coloring in white, white images that are a little bit more complicated, can feel kind of tricky and super duper scary. But there is one thing I can say for sure: when you're Copic coloring in white, and again, I'll talk about this more next week, it's not over till it's over. Stick with it. The best thing that you can do when you're Copic coloring in white or coloring anything white, regardless of the media you use, it's not over till it's over. Stick with it and you'd be surprised at the results. It's pretty cool. And it's one of my most favorite things to do. All right, so I'm coloring in these berries here, and this is where I added a little bit more of that highlight. I have this Pablo. I'm not going to add a whole bunch here at the front part of the scarf. In fact, I probably could have skipped it there. I do want to add a little bit more here because that is a little bit sharper fold. Now, I'm not adding a whole bunch. I don't need to. But I do want just a little bit. On those berries, however, I do take a moment and kind of build that color up on those berries a little bit more because, again, they're going to have more of that highlight. They need to have a little bit more of a starker white space on them, unlike the scarf. Okay, so I'm coloring in this guy's face, and I'm actually going to start with IndigoBlu. I picked up Periwinkle, and I didn't mean to, but I'm actually going to start with IndigoBlu. I have a very light hand here. I don't need this to look blue. I just need it to look like it has some more shade underneath it. I am being pretty conservative because, again, I can always go back and add more, but I can't necessarily take it away. So I am trying to be pretty careful. I am then going to go over the top of that IndigoBlu with that Periwinkle and knock that back just a wee bit. Periwinkle has a little bit more white in it than the IndigoBlu, so we'll kind of lighten that indigo up just a little bit. They blend really well. And I'm only going to add this indigo where my darkest shade is going to be. Actually, the nose is actually going to cast a shadow. That hat is going to cast a shadow on the bottom portion of his face. That's a little bit more shade because it's rounded. Nothing is necessarily reflecting on it. It's just changing shape. So any place where I feel that a shadow is going to be casted, that's where I add just a little bit more IndigoBlu, but I do work at it and build it up. I don't go in with a heavy hand. All right, so now I'm going to add a little bit of texture and shade to the band on this hat. I still have this IndigoBlu in my hand, surprisingly enough. Yes, I am using a blue over an orange, but stick with me, you'll see. I want to add a little bit more texture, so I'm bringing out that IndigoBlu just a little bit across that band, so it looks like that fabric has bunched up and gathered a little bit. I'm also adding this to the darkest areas in that nose, so every place that I had that YR18, I am adding that IndigoBlu, and then once I'm done with that, I am actually bringing in the Prismacolor and Poppy Red. I'm going to go right over the top of that IndigoBlu and bring that out just a little bit. Again, light hand, and I'm going to build up this color, but this does not not at all read red. What I have is a darker orange, a mid-tone orange, and then the lighter orange of that Copic coloring, and that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted. You never think that these colors would work together, but they do. It's pretty cool. Plus, it looks really nice. It's a really nice blend when it's all said and done. I'm going to do the same thing on the nose here. You could also add a little bit more texture to that nose if you'd like. You could bring in that IndigoBlu and kind of draw some bands going across the top of that nose. I didn't, but you totally could. It would look really groovy. And then I got this idea in my head that I was going to add some highlights with the Prismacolor in cream. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but it was totally unnecessary. You could skip that if you'd like. So now I need to do the colored pencil work on my hat. We are just about done with this card, folks. I'm doing the colored pencil work on this hat. This is the 90% cool gray. I very specifically chose cool grays on this. You don't want warm. You have so much cool going on in this card that if you throw in that warm gray, especially on the hat, because the hat takes up a good portion of this card panel. If you throw that on that hat, it will stand out like a sore thumb and it won't look right. So I very specifically chose cool grays for that reason. I'm starting with the 90% cool gray. This is a little bit darker than our C7. That's fine. I'm using it to push those darker shaded areas back a little bit further. And I'm going in with a super light hand, and I am not covering up all of that C7 underneath it. I am so loose in my coloring that you can absolutely see some quite a bit of that C7 to show through, and that's perfect. That's exactly what I want. I'm also using this opportunity to clean up those edges. I actually take the opportunity with all of my colored pencils, regardless of what portion of the image I'm coloring, to clean up my edges with my colored pencils. It just gives a very nice finished look to your images, especially with no line coloring. That's a great way to finish things off. When I was done with that 90% cool gray, I'm coming in with the 70% cool gray. And again, pretty light hand. I'm not trying to completely cover over the top of all of that C5 or any of the C7 or the 90%. I am just coming in and kind of accenting that just a little bit. Now I decided to push this back just a little bit more and make sure that those lines were a little bit crisper and cleaner so you could get more definition in the brim of this hat, and especially where this rolls up here. I need to meet that C5 and that C7 just a little bit better, and the 70% cool gray is perfect for that. Again, I'll bring this in to the top portion of my hat. I am not covering over the top of the I'm not covering over the top of that 90%, nor am I covering over the top of the entire hat, just a tiny bit. And then I'm going to finish this off with the 50% cool gray. I'm actually not going to go any lighter than this. There's really no need to. I do end up bringing in the Pablo white because I was just dinking around and wanted to see what it looked like. But outside of that, I called it good. And that is it, folks. We are done. We are good to go. I have a longer, more detailed video of this over on Patreon. I will have that link down below. You should definitely go check that out. And I will have more details and links on today's video down in the description below, as well as over on my blog. So do be sure to check that out. I hope you enjoyed my card today. If you did, hit that like button and share it with your friends. Also, be sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and tap that bell next to the subscribe button so you can receive all future notifications. Thanks again so much for stopping by. Until next time.